Hi, I'm Hannah and welcome to this slightly too lit. Is that better? That's what we're going with. Hi, I'm Hannah. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up the books that I read in March. Can you believe we're a quarter of the way through the year? I read 12 books in March, but it didn't feel like a great reading month. But we'll chat about it. So I'm going to go through in order that I finished books. Sometimes I do things more thematically than that, but today, for the state that my brain's in, we're just going in order. So right at the beginning of March, I listened to The Nesting by J Cooke on audio, and I thought this was fine. I picked it up because I'd heard Jean talk about it over at Jean's Thoughts, and she described it as quite a spooky, creepy sort of thriller, which is definitely the end of the horror genre that I'm more drawn to. That sort of vibes based horror. I mean, horror is not the right description for this book. It wasn't horror. It follows the main character Lexi, who at the start of it, we know that she has suffered from some real challenges with her mental health. She has attempted suicide, and her life is just not in a great place. And her boyfriend has just broken up with her, rendering her homeless, and she's traveling around just sort of going on trains and in a bit of a panic about what to do with herself. And she overhears these two posh girls talking on a train about this au pairing opportunity that one of them was thinking about applying for in Norway. And for one reason or another, that girl decides not to go for it, but she goes to the cafe cart, and Lexi looks at her laptop, finds the job information, finds her name and CV, and applies for this role and gets it. So she essentially steals the identity of this girl and goes to Norway to au pair for this family, where the husband is an architect. It's a British family. Husband's an architect. They've got two young daughters, and the wife has recently died by suicide. So that's the sort of setup. And I just found it quite hard to really get into. The narrator, bless her, oh sorry, this was narrated by Aisha Kala. And the main character has a Northeast accent, and I think the narrator had really based their accent on Sarah Millican's accent, and to me it just sort of sounded like a Sarah Millican impression, which was quite funny because the character was quite a bit younger than Sarah Millican. So I didn't quite get on with that aspect of the audiobook, but beyond the audio performance, I thought it was absolutely fine, but I really struggled to understand or get into the heads of any of the characters. I found it all quite surface level. And even so there's a mystery around, did the wife kill herself? Did she not? Did something happen? Was it the husband? Was it something supernatural? What is it? And I couldn't tell you now exactly what happened in the end, which sort of maybe tells you all you need to know. But I do think it's me, because lots of people like that book. And I think if you've read other stuff by J Cooke, this was the first I've read of their writing. It just didn't do that much for me, but it was fine. And then I read another book that I liked and was fine, and this is one that has been sat on my shelf for a little while. It's Mostly Dead Things by Kristen Arnett, and this is a sort of queer family drama with taxidermy. And again, sensing a theme with my reading this book. Maybe this is why I'm having a bit of a bummer month, but at the start of this, the main character, whose name I've forgotten, Jessalyn, her father is a taxidermist, and he also dies by suicide at the outset of this book. And the book is then sort of told in this split timeline of Jessalyn as an adult in the aftermath of her father's death, taking over his shop and trying to sort of hold her family together, who are kind of all pretty dysfunctional. And then you get these flashes back to moments in her past, and that's interspersed throughout that narrative. And there they tend to centre around a different creature that is being taxidermied. I actually found the writing about the taxidermy the most compelling part of this book. And again, I just couldn't quite get into the characters in this. Jessalyn is clearly depressed, and has been, you know, not just kind of situational depression based on the fact that her father has died. She is in this really, really fucked up relationship, like love triangle, with her best friend who is another woman, and she's been her best friend since childhood, and they've been sort of sleeping together since they were teenagers. But then the friend marries her brother, so she's in this like love triangle with her brother, and it all feels quite and the mum is having a bit of a breakdown or breakthrough maybe, and there's just like lots going on. And Jessa as a character, I just couldn't get into her head. I really struggled to connect with her, which I think sometimes when you're writing characters that are dealing with mental health problems or depression, like that can be kind of how you, that can kind of be inevitable, I guess. The characters are feeling disconnected, so you feel disconnected from the characters, but it doesn't make for a super compelling reading experience, no matter how accurate that might be. And yeah, Jessa I didn't get a sense of like who she was as a person. It felt like she was a vessel, like an empty vessel to pour plot into, and this kind of like character that was going to be like manipulated through the plot. I didn't get a sense of like who she was as a person, so I read it, I found, as I said, taxidermy, yes, and oh my god, nobody prepared me for the fact that a black Labrador dies in this book. I have a black Labrador, so if you also have a black Labrador, or just any kind of dog, there's a really horrible scene in this where a dog dies, so it's not a spoiler because it doesn't have any relation on the rest of the plot, but be warned, because that was not nice. So there was that, and then I read a book that I did really like. So whew. I have been a fan of Jen Campbell's YouTube channel for a really long time. Actually, Jen Campbell is the person, I think I've said this before, who I discovered that BookTube was a thing by finding Jen Campbell talking about Not How to Be Both, There But For The by Ali Smith. So Jen has a special place in my heart. And Jen is a writer. She's a poet and a children's author and has written short story collections for adults. And I have never read any of her stuff, and I've been meaning to. And I have bought The Girl Aquarium, which is her first poetry collection, which came out with Blood Axe. Her second is out in September of this year. And I really, really liked this. Now, admittedly, I don't read a lot of poetry, especially a lot of contemporary poetry. So I think I need to sharpen up my like critical reading skills when it comes to poetry, because it's obviously a very different experience to kind of reading novels, short stories, non-fiction, etc. And there were some of these that I think went a little over my head, or I didn't quite understand what was going on. But I think that's always the case with me in poetry. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this. So Jen is a queer, disabled poet, and those are themes that are explored throughout this collection, as well as a lot of like folklore-y, fairy tale, freak show sort of vibes. And I wrote down the names of yeah, so some of the poems that I particularly liked in this were The Bear, The Angel of the North. Oh, Jen is originally from just outside Sunderland, I think, so also counts as one of my Northeast authors. If you're new here, I live in the northeast of England, and one of my reading goals this year was to read more local authors, so Jen definitely counts. And Hello Dark and Netted. They were the four that I think stood out for me, and it's definitely made me want to read more poetry. So if you are someone who reads a lot of poetry, particularly kind of contemporary poetry, and you have any recommendations, please do drop them in the comments down below, because I find like with a lot of things, there's poetry that I really get on with, and I really got on with Jen's, and there's other poetry that just like doesn't do it for me at all. So yeah, I'm keen to get some recommendations. Thank you very much. The next book is sadly this was a DNF, but I am counting it in my overall, because I read a good chunk of it and I attended a book club about it, so I do feel like I have read this book, and it's Dead Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. And I really loved the premise of this book. It is a sort of, as you can probably tell from the cover, like 1920s New York, Harlem Renaissance, crime noir kind of book, and I thought that sounded so cool. This was our March pick for Queer Books Newcastle, which is the book club that I'm part of, and here is your monthly shout out for if you are interested in joining. There's a link to the Instagram page where you can find out more about that book club. It's a lovely bunch of people, and yeah, this didn't do a lot for me. I didn't really gel with the writing style. I wasn't really interested in the plot, and all the characters sort of blurred into one a little bit for me. And from people who read the entire thing, some people did really like it, but a lot of people thought that it felt quite like it needed a good edit, and it still needed quite a bit of work doing to it, which was a shame. But yeah, I think I probably would have persevered with it, except that I was due to be going on holiday as I'd started reading this, and I just really didn't want this to be my holiday read. I wasn't enjoying it enough to want it to be a book that I was gonna take on holiday and read. So yeah, that was not so much of a hit again, sadly. I also was really confused because I assumed, partly from the cover and also from the writing style, that this was YA, and apparently, I think I even, because I did mention this briefly in a reading blog that I did for my trip to Gdansk, which you'll hear more about in a second, and I called it YA, and my friend Emily was like, no, that's not what it's marketed at. It's not marketed as a YA book. And I'm like, really? Because this says YA to me, and it reads like YA, which again, I thought was the reason I wasn't getting on with it, because I tend not to love YA, which is fine. Like, no shade on people who do. It doesn't do a lot for me. So there was that. Next up. Okay, so next we have 3 books that I'm going to talk about quite quickly, because they're work-related books. So they are books that I read, but you might not be like super interested in them. So I'll rattle through them. This is Diverse Educators, a Manifesto, edited by Hannah Wilson and Bennie, who are the co-founders of Diverse Ed, which is a movement. I work in education, in case you couldn't tell. Yeah, it's a grassroots diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. And this book is basically split up into all of the 9 protected characteristics of like age, race, class, religion. Class isn't one of them. Age, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, sexuality, gender reassignment, like pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership. Was that 9? I can't remember. Anyway, and each chapter was one of those characteristics, and then within that chapter there were 10 essays from 10 different educators reflecting on those topics, and that was really interesting. Unfortunately, I mean, it's probably not designed to be read cover to cover, but I did have to read it cover to cover for work, so that was like a bit of a repetitive experience, because I do feel like a lot of, like 10 essays was quite a lot on one topic. for there to be like no repetition. Like the stats around the highest proportion of people leaving the teaching profession being women with children in their 30s was definitely quoted in about 6 of the essays about gender and about paternity, because that's why women are leaving the profession largely. So yeah, it was good, but it was a little bit repetitive. But if you want something as a kind of reference guide, it'll be really good for that. The next one, if you're not in education, you're going to be not interested at all. This is a book about it's a curious curriculum, teaching foundation subjects well, by Claire Banks and Mick Waters. I was running a project with Mick Waters. It's why I read this book. It's all about primary curriculum. So by all means, if you're interested in that, it's a good book for it, but you probably won't be. And this one was the final work-related one. It's Leading Academy Trusts, Why Some Fail But Most Don't, by Sir David Carter and Laura McInerney. And yeah, it was interesting in the sense that it was informative, but it was bone dry. Don't read this unless you have to, because it's dull. Even Laura McInerney, who I love and is the co-founder of Teacher Tap, and she used to edit Schools Week, and she's brilliant. But yeah, this is just as you'd expect. All the ins and outs of the logistics of multi-academy trusts, not super compelling. So let's get back to some books that you might actually be interested in. And I'm not massively going to talk about these next 3 either, because I talked about them in a reading vlog that I filmed when I went on holiday to Gdansk in Poland earlier this month. So the first book I read was the Chicago Review of New Polish Writing. And this is an anthology of Polish writing. And we've been having a bit of a Polish time with our holidays recently. So I bought this when we were in Krakow last year, and I read it this year when we were in Gdansk. This has, I think, like 70 odd writers in, and as with anthologies of this nature, some of it I didn't get on with, but I did discover some new voices, new to me voices, of Polish writers that I do want to check out again in the future. But yeah, it was good. It was fine. If you want to hear more about maybe some of the people that I was interested in, particularly, I talk about that more in my Gdansk reading vlog, which I will link down below. And then the second book that I read in that reading vlog was this, which is The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. I really, really enjoyed this. Enjoyed. No, I think I did, because although it sounds morbid, this isn't about the deaths of these women. This is about their lives, and they had difficult lives, don't get me wrong. But I really loved the way Hallie Rubenhold told these stories. I think I get on best with historical nonfiction when it is like centered around people. I really struggle sometimes with like broad scope history, because it feels a bit intangible, and like I can't kind of like, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in this video complaining about not connecting to characters, because I really feel like I need that, and I also feel like I need it in history. So this really, I felt like I really did understand and connect to these women. So I think Hallie Rubenhold did a brilliant job. And if you've read this and have recommendations for other sort of similar historical nonfiction, I would really, really, really like to hear your suggestions, because this was one I really liked, and I don't know of that many that are going to be like it. But if you have suggestions, then do let me know. And thank you very much to my friend Jess for lending it to me. Nearly had a pile of books on the floor there. So, next up, final book that I talked about in the Gdansk vlog was Waterland by Graham Swift. I listened to this on audio, and it was narrated by Alex Jennings. Did I just expose myself there? Let me stay back a little bit. Again, I liked this. I think this is going to be a really marmitey book, because it's very, very slow. and it's quite meandering, and at points you're like, what is the point of this book? I'm going to sneeze. So, what was I saying? Yeah, so at points in the book you're like, what is this book about? And Waterland is a really apt title for it, because it's about, ostensibly, this man, Henry Crick, who is a history teacher. He's from the Fenlands in Cambridgeshire. And it's kind of a history. It's kind of like about his life. This is a novel, in case I didn't make that clear. It's about his life. And his dad was a lock keeper, and one day they pull a body out of the lock when he's a teenager, and a lot of the book is sort of about uncovering what happened there, because it was a boy who was his age, who he knew, and a lot of people thought he just drowned because he couldn't swim, but maybe he didn't, and so there is this kind of mystery running through it. But then also in the present day, the whole book is sort of told as if he is talking to his history class, and he is being squeezed out of the school. The history curriculum is being squeezed out. It's written at a time where everyone was really caring about progress and preparing kids for the future, and so history it was a subject that he felt was being sidelined in the curriculum, and people didn't understand why it was important to understand the past and respect the past and learn from past mistakes and all that. So there's an element of that. There's also something his wife has done in the present day that is a little bit scandalous. And then throughout all of this, it shifts and is really about this, like a kind of, parts of it are like an agricultural history, like kind of social history of this region in the east of England. And I really enjoyed it on the whole. I thought the writing of like the setting and location in the Fenlands was beautiful. But if you are the sort of reader where you need to know where you're going, and there needs to be like a real clear like narrative and plot going through, this is probably not going to be one that I would recommend. It was shortlisted for the Booker sometime last century. I think was it 80s? Sometime in the 80s. So it is a Booker backlist book, and I would say it's a very Bookery book. Which, if you tend to read books that are on the Booker Prize, I think you will know what I mean. And this hopefully gives you enough of an indication about the sort of vibe of the book to know if it would be one for you. But like, it wasn't like an out favourite, but I did enjoy it. And again, I talk about that more in the vlog. And then the penultimate book, book number 11, is another water-themed book. I read Saltwater by Jessica Andrews. Jessica Andrews is another local author. So I bought this. I went into the Accidental Bookshop in Arnett, and I asked the bookseller, please, could you recommend me a book that is preferably literary fiction written by a local author? And they said, Saltwater by Jessica Andrews. And on the whole, I enjoyed this. I started reading this in the Gdansk vlog, but I didn't wrap it up. So it's funny because I think I'd started saying, oh yeah, it's about motherhood. And it did start out being about motherhood, but actually this is about a woman called Lucy reflecting on her life. She's in her 20s. And this is like, was brutal at points, but also really tender and intimate. It is about growing up working class in the Northeast, and there's parts of it are kind of her childhood in the Northeast. There's parts of it that her going to university in London, and then there's parts of it again where she's had this sort of crisis of confidence about her life, and her grandfather has just died and he lived in Ireland, and she's gone to live in his house in on the west coast of Ireland. And I definitely, probably just because of like my age, I resonated most with the bit where she was a bit older, like late 20s, early 30s. I can't remember exactly how old she was in the final bit. But when she's living out in Ireland, but you know, I'm from London and I used to live there, and I got everything she was saying about London. But this is really about like generational trauma and how poverty interacts with that, and what it does to your confidence and psyche to be working class and feel like you're not as good as your peers who are from more privileged backgrounds. And that's definitely what the chunk where she's in London is really about. But it's also about, throughout this, her relationship with her parents. She sort of is desperate to retain this really close bond with her mum that she feels is slipping as they get older. Her parents are separated. Her dad is an alcoholic and periodically disappears from their lives. He's an absentee parent, but he also just disappears. He comes to her graduation in London and then disappears for like 5 days. And the actual kind of literal stress of not knowing where your parent is and having to kind of be the parent for them. And by this point, her mum has kind of checked out with it and been like, he is not my problem anymore. We are not together. I cannot help you with this. I have moved on. And so, yeah, I'm not doing a very good job of talking about it, but I thought it was really, really, really great. It was probably I think it's probably my favourite book that I read this month. Good month for the Northeast authors. Yeah, I really, really recommend this. And I know she has another book called Milk Teeth, which I haven't read, but I'm very much looking forward to getting to. It's told, this book, in these really quite short chapters. They're quite vignette-y. And on the most part, that really worked for me. You did get this kind of like shifting sort of lack of... It made the book feel quite unstable, not in a way where I didn't feel like Jessica Andrews was in control of it, but just where there was a lot of slippage, and things sort of bubbled up and simmered away, rather like the tides of salt water, I think. But on the whole, I think she's a beautiful writer. There were a couple of points where the writing edged slightly too much for me into the poetical in a way that lacked clarity or like focus for me. You know, sometimes it feels where a writer has found a phrase that reads really beautifully on the page, but I was reading it like, I'm not sure that's actually clearly communicating an idea, a feeling, an emotion. I think it just is a nice sounding line. There were a couple of points, and I mean only a couple of points, where it like glitched me a little bit like that. But on the whole, thoroughly recommend. Give it a check out if you like that sort of thing. But definitely check out the content warnings. This is it's a difficult read for some people, I would imagine. And then the last book I read, and I'm thrilled I managed to finish it, because up until this point I'd read 11 books in March, and I'd also read 11 books in January and 11 books in February, and I am the sort of person who does not enjoy symmetry. So I was really, really grumpy at the thought that I might have read 11 books again. So I did manage to finish the audiobook that I was listening to. I had asked on Instagram for you guys to pick my next audiobook. I gave you the choice of The Shrines of Gaiety by Kate Atkinson, The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer, Blue Monday by Nikki French, and this fourth one, which is what you picked, which is The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida by Sheehan Karunatilaka. And I listened to this on audio. It was narrated by Shivantha sorry, that is more me not reading my writing than anything else. By Shivantha Vijayasena. Vijayasena? I'm sorry. I could just listen to the audiobook where they introduce the narrator a bit, but never mind. I'm doing my best. And yeah, this is a book that you may be familiar with, it won the Booker Prize in 2022, so it has had quite a lot of publicity, and it was definitely one of the ones on the list that I was interested in, but I couldn't work out. Sometimes I get a vibe from a book, like, oh yeah, I think I'm really going to like that, or I don't think that's going to do it for me. And I really didn't know with the Seven Moons of Marley Almeida, because I knew it had a sort of magical realist sort of bent, and that I do find quite marmotty. Like, when it's done really well, I really engage with it, and when it's not done, well, I'm not even going to say when it's done well or not well, because I'm not making a value judgment about it. Just sometimes it really works for me, and sometimes it really doesn't, because of me, because of my own personal taste, not because of the failings of any individual writer. But yeah, I did, on the whole, I liked this. I didn't read tons of the stuff on the Booker shortlist last year, so I don't know if this would have been like near the top of the list for me. But it is about Marley Almeida, who is a war photographer in Sri Lanka, who dies right at the start. He's dead at the start of the book. This is not a spoiler. So he is dead, and he wakes up in the afterlife, which is kind of hilariously bureaucratic. And if you enjoy the more satirical style of Salman Rushdie, I think you'll get on with the writing style in this book. And he doesn't know how he's died. And the setup of the afterlife is that you have 7 moons to kind of figure out what you want to do with your afterlife. And Marley's priority at the minute is to work out why he is dead. Because he was a photographer, and he sort of took photographs for various different sides of the conflict in Sri Lanka. So what I really liked about this book was understanding and learning more about the JVP, Tamil Tigers, the government, and kind of those interactions and how that works. And this is a very satirical book, and those parts of it I really enjoyed. I really liked Marley as a character. He's incredibly flawed. He's tussling throughout. You get kind of bits of it that are obviously like his memories of his life, and then bits of him watching people in his life in the present day. But the whole book is written in the second person, so you. And the you is Marley Almeida. And second person narratives don't often do it for me, and this did take me quite a long time to get into. On the whole, I found that I always enjoyed the writing, and I always thought it was clever and deft, and that the people were drawn really sharply. I didn't get on as well with the sort of, I don't know what to describe it as, because it's not a magic system, but like the iteration of the afterlife and the rules and how Marley could and couldn't move around, and the places he could and couldn't go, and the reasons it had to be 7 moons, and then like those parts of it, and then this sort of slightly supernatural threat that appears slightly later on in the book, they were all bits that I just didn't get on with as well. I found it really got in the way of me sort of buying into, like, the 7 moons that are there to provide the urgency, right, and the push to get through the narrative, because he's only got 7 days to make kind of like decisions or to like do what he needs to do. But because I found the like system of that a little bit shaky, I was less, it was less effective, I guess is what I'm saying, at making me really feel that urgency. And it felt a little bit like the system had been engineered to allow the plot to happen in the way that the writer wanted it to happen, as opposed to this is the system and therefore this is what happens in the plot, if you get what I mean. Interestingly, I just heard Jen Campbell talk about reading Frankenstein in Baghdad by, oh my gosh, the author's name escapes me, and saying that she found them quite similar, and that she thinks she would have enjoyed Frankenstein in Baghdad more had she not read The 7 Moons of Marley Almeida. I think I'm the other way around, because I read Frankenstein in Baghdad last year, or the year before last, And I think I enjoyed that more, and I think I would have enjoyed The Seven Moons of Marley Almeida more if I hadn't read Frankenstein in Baghdad. So I can see why it won the Booker. I do think it is a good book. I think the author is a really, really good writer. I just think I'm a bit hit and miss with magic realism, and sometimes and this just didn't quite work for me. So that is everything. Everything I read in I was going to say March. What do you think of wrap-ups? Do you enjoy wrap-ups? It's now like the 5th or 6th of April. I find myself struggling to sit down and record them, and I think it's because I don't enjoy having to remember everything. I am Hannah Lost the Plot for a reason, right? There is a reason that is my screen name. And I really struggle to remember the plots of books, and well, not even the plots, but struggle to remember my like thoughts and feelings about books that I read earlier on in the month. So I think what I'm going to try in April is maybe recording segments of my wrap up like weekly and then cutting it together into one video so that I can give you kind of more immediate thoughts, because I always feel like I've got more to say about the books that I've read most recently, and that doesn't necessarily feel fair. But equally, I think I seem to get more views, not that it's about the views, but it seems to be that people are more interested in the reading vlogs than the wrap-ups. So you tell me down below, because I definitely enjoy doing the reading vlogs more than I enjoy doing the wrap-ups. I don't mind doing the wrap-ups. I like talking about books in any format. But I'm just curious, let me know. Like, if I didn't do wrap-ups, do you feel like, does that matter? I think I just do them because everyone does them. Maybe I shouldn't do them. Who knows? I'll try this new way in April. And yeah, let me know what you think. Please, in the comments down below, let me know what you read in March, what were your favourite things that you read, if you have read any of these books, or if you are interested in picking any of them up after hearing me talk about them. If you have poetry recommendations, contemporary poetry recommendations, and historical non-fiction with Hallie Rubenhold vibes, please let me know down below. Also, just say hi. That would be nice. And you know, say hi and give me an emoji of your favourite animals so that, you know, I know that you got this far in the video. And then, yeah, I will speak to you soon for, I think the next video you will see will be a reading vlog where I am reading a book from Norway for my Read the World challenge. And if you are new here, please do consider liking and subscribing to my channel. It really does help me with the old algorithm because I'm quite new here. So yeah, happy April. See you soon. Bye.